The morning air at Windsor Castle carried an unusual tension that even the staff members could sense. Queen Camilla walked through the long corridor with her usual composed demeanor, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. She had specific instructions to deliver, and as the queen consort, she expected them to be followed without question. Sergeant James Mitchell stood at his post near the East Wing entrance, a position he had maintained with unwavering dedication for nearly 15 years. His uniform was impeccable, every button polished to perfection, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. He had served under Queen Elizabeth II, and now continued his duty under the new reign. His reputation among the royal guard was legendary, not just for his discipline, but for his deep understanding of royal protocol and his absolute commitment to the safety of the royal family. Camilla approached him with a folder in her hand, her expression neutral but her intentions clear. She stopped directly in front of him, expecting the usual deference. "Sergeant Mitchell," she began, her voice carrying the weight of authority she had grown accustomed to wielding, "I need you to reassign the security detail for this afternoon's garden event. I want the personnel reduced by half. We're expecting only close family, and I believe the current arrangements are excessive." Mitchell stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on a point just above her shoulder, as protocol demanded. He had heard the request clearly, but something about it sent alarm bells ringing in his trained mind. The garden event she mentioned was scheduled to include the young royals, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. Security protocols for events involving the children of the Prince and Princess of Wales were not something that could be altered on a whim, regardless of who made the request. "Your Majesty," he responded, his voice respectful but firm, "I'm afraid I cannot authorize that change. The security arrangements for any event involving the Wales children require approval from their parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, or from His Majesty the King directly. It's a standing protocol that has been in place for their protection." Camilla's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. She was not accustomed to being contradicted, especially not by palace staff. "I am the Queen Consort, Sergeant. I believe my authority is sufficient in this matter." Michel maintained his composure, though inside he felt the weight of the moment. This was not about disrespect. This was about the safety of children he had sworn to protect. "With the greatest respect, Your Majesty, the protocol is clear. The security arrangements for the direct heirs cannot be modified without proper authorization. I must respectfully decline to make those changes." The corridor seemed to grow colder. Other staff members who had been passing through quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. Camilla's face tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. She had dealt with resistance before, but rarely so directly, and never from someone in Mitchell's position. "You're refusing a direct order from the Queen Consort?" "Following the established security protocols, Your Majesty," Mitchell replied, his voice steady. "Protocols that exist to protect the royal family, including the young princes and princess. I have a duty that supersedes any single order, and that duty is to their safety." Before Camilla could respond, footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Prince William appeared, dressed in a casual navy sweater and khaki trousers, clearly having overheard at least part of the exchange. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic in the room. He had been on his way to check on the arrangements for the afternoon himself, wanting to ensure everything was in order for his children. "Is there a problem here?" William asked, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone that suggested he already understood. The situation better than most would give him credit for. Camilla turned to face him, attempting to regain her composure. "William, I was simply trying to streamline the security arrangements for this afternoon. It seems unnecessarily complicated for a family gathering." William's eyes moved from Camilla to Sergeant Mitchell, and in that brief glance an understanding passed between them. Mitchell had served the family long enough for William to know his character, to trust his judgment implicitly. "Sergeant Mitchell, can you explain the current arrangements?" Mitchell nodded crisply. "Your Royal Highness, the current security detail follows standard protocol for any outdoor event involving your children. We have both visible and discreet personnel positioned throughout the gardens, emergency response teams on standby, and continuous monitoring of all entry points. The arrangements were reviewed and approved by your office yesterday afternoon." William listened carefully, then nodded slowly. He turned to Camilla, his expression diplomatic but firm. The security arrangements for George, Charlotte, and Louis are non-negotiable. Catherine and I have worked closely with the security team to ensure protocols that keep them safe while allowing them as much normalcy as possible. Those protocols exist for good reason, and they won't be changed without our explicit approval. Camilla's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This was not the support she had expected from her stepson. Wasn't suggesting we compromise their safety, William. I simply thought, I understand, William interrupted gently but firmly. But in matters concerning my children's security, Sergeant Mitchell's judgment is sound. If he believes the current arrangements are necessary, then they remain as they are. He paused, then added with careful diplomacy. I appreciate your concern for efficiency, but when it comes to George, Charlotte, and Louis, we are on the side of caution always. The message was clear, delivered with the authority of a future king who had learned the delicate balance of respect and firmness from his grandmother. Camilla realized that pushing further would only create a scene that would inevitably reach other ears, so other family members and potentially the media if staff decided to talk. Very well, she said stiffly, her chin lifting slightly. I defer to your judgment in matters concerning your children. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing with barely contained frustration. William watched her go, then turned back to Mitchell. The sergeant remained at attention, though there was a hint of relief in his eyes. Thank you, Sergeant Mitchell. You did exactly as you should have done. My children's safety is not a matter of compromise, regardless of who makes the request. Thank you, Your Royal Highness, Mitchell replied. I apologize if I caused any difficulty. You caused no difficulty at all, William assured him. You did your job, and you did it well. That's exactly what we need from you. He glanced down the corridor where Camilla had disappeared, his expression thoughtful. It's not always easy, standing firm when authority pushes back. But some things are worth standing firm for. Mitchell nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind the words. This was not just about protocol or security arrangements. This was about boundaries, about the protection of children who would one day carry the weight of the crown, and about ensuring that those who stood guard over them never wavered in that commitment. As William walked away to continue his preparations, Mitchell returned to his post, his spine a little straighter, his resolve a little stronger. He had done what was right, and that had been acknowledged by the person whose opinion mattered most in this particular matter. The afternoon garden event would proceed with full security, and the young royals would be safe under his watch. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Windsor Castle gardens as preparations continued for the family gathering. Catherine, Princess of Wales, arrived early to check on the arrangements personally. She wore a simple floral dress, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Every bit the devoted mother, rather than the future queen. She had always taken an active role in planning events that involved her children, understanding that these moments of normalcy were precious and fleeting. As she walked through the garden, she spotted Sergeant Mitchell coordinating with his team near the rose arbor. Something in his posture suggested tension, a slight stiffness that someone who didn't know him well might miss. Catherine had worked with the security team for years, and she could read the signs. Good afternoon, Sergeant Mitchell, she greeted him warmly. Everything in order for this afternoon? Mitchell turned and offered a respectful nod. Your Royal Highness, yes. Everything is proceeding according to plan. The security arrangements are in place, and we're conducting final checks now. Catherine studied him for a moment, her intuition telling her there was more to the story. I heard there was some discussion this morning about the security detail. Would you like to tell me about it? Mitchell hesitated for just a fraction of a second. He was loyal to the family, all of them, but his primary duty was to the children under his protection. There was a request to reduce the security presence, Your Royal Highness. I declined to authorize it without proper approval. His Royal Highness Prince William confirmed that the current arrangements should remain unchanged. Catherine's expression remained neutral, but her eyes showed understanding. She had navigated the complex dynamics of royal life long enough to read between the lines. Thank you for following protocol, Sergeant. The safety of George, Charlotte, and Louis is always our first priority. You did exactly right. Thank you, ma'am, Mitchell replied. Visibly relieved to have her confirmation as well, Catherine moved on to inspect the seating arrangements and the activity areas set up for the children. The garden party was meant to be a relaxed family afternoon, a chance for the young royals to spend time with their grandfather, the king, and other close family members. These moments were carefully orchestrated to provide the children with family connections while maintaining their security and privacy inside the castle in one of the private family rooms. Princess Charlotte sat on a window seat, her legs tucked under her, staring out at the garden preparations. At 9 years old, she had inherited her great-grandmother's perceptive nature and her mother's emotional intelligence. She had been unusually quiet for the past few days, something that hadn't escaped her mother's notice. Prince George, 11 now, and growing more aware of his future role with each passing year, sat at a nearby desk, supposedly working on homework, but his attention kept drifting. He had overheard snippets of conversation between staff members earlier. Words like confrontation and Queen Camilla and security changes. He understood more than adults sometimes gave him credit for, and the weight of that understanding sometimes made him feel older than his years. Charlotte finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "George, why do you think Camilla wanted less security people at the garden party?" George looked up from his books, surprised that his sister had been thinking about the same thing he had. "I don't know, Lottie. Maybe she thought it would be more comfortable with fewer people around." Charlotte shook her head slowly. "But Mummy and Papa always say the security people keep us safe. Why would she want less of them?" Her young face showed genuine confusion, a kind of innocent questioning that cut straight to the heart of complex adult matters. George didn't have an answer. He set down his pen and walked over to sit beside his sister on the window seat. "I heard Papa talking to Mummy earlier," he admitted quietly. He sounded worried, but he was trying not to show it. Charlotte looked at her brother, her eyes wide. "Do you think something bad might happen?" "No," George said quickly, with more confidence than he felt. "Papa and Sergeant Mitchell won't let anything bad happen. They always keep us safe." But even as he said the words, something in his chest felt tight. A vague anxiety he couldn't quite name. The truth was, George had been feeling the weight of expectations more heavily lately. His tutors had begun including more lessons about royal history, about duty and responsibility. He understood, in an abstract way, that one day he would be king. But recently, that abstract concept had started feeling more real, more immediate, and with that realization came an awareness of the complicated relationships within his own family. The subtle tensions that adults tried to hide, but children inevitably sensed. Charlotte reached over and took her brother's hand, a gesture of comfort that came naturally to her. "I'm glad we have Mummy and Papa," she said simply, "and I'm glad Sergeant Mitchell didn't change the security. I like knowing everyone is watching out for us." George squeezed her hand back, grateful for her straightforward view of things. Sometimes Charlotte had a way of cutting through complexity to find the essential truth. They sat together in companionable silence, watching the preparations below downstairs. In the king's private study, King Charles sat behind his desk, reading a brief report that William had thought it necessary to share with him. The paper outlined the morning's incident with clinical precision, but Charles could read the implications behind the formal language. He set the paper down and rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar ache that came with family complications. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, already knowing who it would be. William entered, closing the door behind him. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical exertion but from emotional strain. "I thought you should know directly from me, rather than hearing various versions through the palace grapevine." Charles gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit, William. I've read your report. I appreciate you handling it as you did." William sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I wasn't trying to undermine Camilla's authority, Father. But when it comes to my children, you don't need to explain," Charles interrupted gently. "You did what any father would do, what any future king must do. You protected your children and supported the protocols that exist for their safety. I would have done the same." It was a long pause. William struggled with what to say next, how to express the complexity of his feelings without creating further family division. It's difficult sometimes, balancing family relationships with what's right for George, Charlotte, and Louis. I don't want to create conflicts, but I also won't compromise on their well-being. Charles nodded slowly, understanding more than William perhaps realized. I know that balance well, my son. I've walked that line my entire life. Sometimes you cannot avoid conflicts, no matter how much you wish to. Sometimes protecting what matters most means accepting that not everyone will understand or agree with your choices. William met his father's eyes. Seeing the weight of experience there, the accumulated wisdom of decades navigating these exact challenges. George is becoming more aware, William said quietly. He picks up on tensions, on subtle dynamics. I see him withdrawing sometimes, becoming too serious for his age. And Charlotte, she asks questions that show she senses more than we realize. I want to protect them from all of this complexity, but I also know I can't shield them forever. No, you cannot, Charles agreed. But you can model for them how to handle complexity with grace, how to stand firm in your principles while remaining compassionate. They're watching you, William. Every decision you make, every stand you take, teaches them how to navigate the challenges they'll face when their time comes. William absorbed these words, finding both comfort and burden in them. Charlotte has been so quiet lately. She usually talks constantly, asks a million questions. But the last few days, she's been withdrawn. And George, he's trying so hard to be brave, to be strong, but I can see the anxiety in him. They shouldn't have to worry about family politics at their age. Charles stood and moved to the window, looking out at the same garden his grandchildren had been watching from above. Perhaps, he said thoughtfully, what they need is not protection from the knowledge that these complexities exist, but reassurance that they're loved and supported, regardless of those complexities. Children are remarkably resilient when they know they're secure in their parents' love and in the stability of their family unit. William joined his father at the window. Together, they watched the security team making their final preparations, each guard moving with practiced efficiency. I hate that they have to grow up with this level of security, this awareness of danger, William admitted. I know, Charles said softly. But look at what that security represents. It represents a kingdom that values them, that's committed to their protection. And more importantly, look at Sergeant Mitchell down there. He stood up to the Queen Consort this morning because he believed it was right, because his commitment to protecting your children superseded his comfort or his career concerns. That's something for George and Charlotte to understand and appreciate as they grow older. They're surrounded by people who genuinely care about their well-being. William nodded, watching Mitchell coordinate with his team. I should probably go up and talk to George and Charlotte. Help them understand what happened this morning in age-appropriate terms. They'll have heard something. It's better they hear the truth from me than piece together fragments from overheard conversations. That's wise, Charles agreed. And William, thank you for how you handled this morning. It couldn't have been easy, but it was necessary. You're going to be a good king, not just because you understand duty, but because you understand love and loyalty. William felt a lump in his throat at his father's words. Praise from Charles had always meant something deep to him, perhaps because it had been so carefully measured throughout his life. Thank you, Father. That means more than you know. As William left to find his children, Charles remained at the window, his thoughts complex and troubled. He loved Camilla deeply, but he was also acutely aware that her integration into the family had not been without complications. This morning's incident was a reminder that authority and respect were not the same thing, and that earning genuine trust within the family structure required understanding boundaries and priorities. William climbed the familiar stairs to the family quarters, his mind working through how to approach the conversation with his children. As a father, his instinct was always to shield them from difficulty. As a future king, he knew they needed to learn to navigate complex situations with wisdom and grace. Finding the balance between those two imperatives was perhaps his greatest challenge. He found George and Charlotte exactly where he expected them, still sitting together on the window seat, their heads close together in quiet conversation. They looked up as he entered, and he could see the questions in their eyes even before they spoke. "Papa," Charlotte said immediately, her voice carrying a note of urgency she'd been holding back. "Is everything all right?" We heard that Camilla wanted to change the security for the garden party. William felt his heart squeeze at her directness. He should have known Charlotte would cut straight to the heart of the matter. She had never been one to dance around difficult topics. He crossed the room and sat down on the window seat with them, making himself physically at their level. "You heard correctly," he said calmly. "There was a disagreement this morning about the security arrangements. But I want you both to understand what happened and why." George sat up straighter, his young face serious and attentive. Charlotte leaned against her father's side, drawing comfort from his presence while listening intently. Camilla thought that having so many security people at a family garden party was unnecessary, William explained carefully. She asked Sergeant Mitchell to reduce the number of guards. But Sergeant Mitchell told her no. Charlotte's eyes went wide. "He said no to the Queen Consort." William nodded. "He did because there are rules about your security that exist to keep you safe. Those rules say that no one can change your security arrangements without Mummy's or my approval, or Grandpa the King's approval." Sergeant Mitchell was following those rules even though it was difficult to say no to Camilla. George processed this information quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. Was Camilla angry with him? She was surprised and probably a bit upset, William admitted honestly. It's not easy for anyone to be told no, especially when they're used to people following their instructions. But being told no doesn't always mean something bad. Sometimes it means someone is doing their job correctly, protecting something important. Charlotte looked up at her father. "Were you angry with her, Papa?" "For wanting less security." William chose his words carefully. This was where parenting intersected with politics, where he had to be honest without creating resentment or division within the family. "I wasn't angry, sweetheart, but I was concerned. Your safety is the most important thing to Mummy and me. We work very hard with the security team to make sure you're protected while still being able to have as normal a life as possible. When someone suggests changing those arrangements without talking to us first, it makes me worried." "Because you want us to be safe," Charlotte said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Exactly," William confirmed. "You, George, and Louis are the most precious things in the world to us. We would never, ever compromise on your safety, no matter who asks us to." George had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he spoke, his voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for an 11-year-old. "Papa, is Camilla going to be angry with us now? Is this going to make things difficult at family gatherings?" William felt a pang at the question. George was already learning to think about family dynamics, about political implications, about how one moment could ripple out and affect multiple relationships. It was a burden William wished his son didn't have to carry yet, but he also knew it was an inevitable part of who George was and what he would become. "I hope not," William said honestly. "And if there is any difficulty, that's for Mummy and me to manage, not for you to worry about. You three just need to be children, to enjoy your afternoon, to play and laugh and have fun. The adult complications are ours to handle." Charlotte snuggled closer to her father. "I'm glad you were there this morning, Papa. I'm glad you stood up for Sergeant Mitchell and for us." William wrapped his arms around both his children, pulling them close. "I will always stand up for you. Always. That's my job as your father, and it's my duty as your papa. Nothing and no one comes before your safety and well-being." They sat like that for a long moment, a small island of family security in the midst of complex royal dynamics. George finally broke the silence with a question that had clearly been troubling him. "Papa, when I'm king someday, will I have to make hard choices like this? Will I have to tell people no, even when it's uncomfortable?" William looked at his eldest son, seeing the weight of awareness in his eyes, the dawning understanding of the responsibilities that lay ahead. "Yes, George, you will. Being king isn't just about wearing a crown or living in palaces. It's about making difficult decisions. It's about standing firm on what's right even when it's unpopular, about protecting the people who depend on you. But you don't have to worry about that now. You have many years to learn and grow before those responsibilities become yours." "But I do worry about it," George admitted, his voice small. "Sometimes I hear people talking about when I'll be king, and it feels so big and scary. What if I make the wrong choices? What if I let people down? William's heart ached for his son. He remembered being George's age, feeling the weight of expectation beginning to settle on his shoulders. "George, look at me." His son raised his eyes to meet his father's. "You will make mistakes. Every king in history has made mistakes. But you know what makes a good king? Not being perfect. It's being willing to learn, to listen to wise counsel, to care deeply about the people you serve, and to always prioritize what's right over what's easy or popular." Who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up with her characteristic insight. "Is that what you did this morning, Papa? You chose what was right over what was easy?" William smiled at his daughter's perceptiveness. "Exactly right, Lottie. It would have been easier to just let the security changes happen, to avoid any conflict. But the right thing to do was to make sure you were all protected, even if that made things uncomfortable." George seemed to draw strength from his father's words, sitting up a little straighter. "I want to be like you, Papa. I want to make good choices even when they're hard." "And you will," William assured him. "You already do, more than you realize. The fact that you think about these things, that you care about doing the right thing, tells me you're going to be an excellent king someday. But for now, you're 11 years old, and you deserve to be 11 years old. Let Mummy and me handle the complicated adult stuff." Charlotte shifted position, looking out the window at the garden below where the security team was still making final preparations. "Papa, can I tell you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "You can always tell me anything." Charlotte hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes I feel like we're different from other children. Not just because we live in palaces or have security people, but because we have to think about things other kids don't think about, like whether someone is being nice to us because they like us or because of who we are. Or like this morning, wondering why someone would want us to have less protection." William felt tears prick his eyes at his daughter's words. She had articulated something he himself had struggled with his entire life. The complex burden of never being quite sure of people's motivations, of always having to consider the political implications of personal relationships. "You're right," he said softly. "You are different from most children, in ways that are sometimes wonderful and sometimes very difficult. But you know what else is true? You have each other. You have George and Louis, and they understand what you're going through in a way no one else ever could. And you have Mummy and me, and we understand too, because we've lived with these same challenges. You're not alone in this, Lottie. You're never alone." Charlotte nodded, blinking back tears. "I know, Papa. I just wish sometimes that things could be simpler." "I know you do," William said, hugging her close. "I wish that for you too. But you know what makes me incredibly proud? The way you handle complexity with such grace and wisdom. You're only 9 years old, but you have the emotional intelligence of someone much older. That's a gift, Charlotte, even when it feels like a burden." George had been quiet again, processing the conversation, but now he spoke up once more. "Papa, should we say something to Camilla this afternoon? At the garden party? Should we act like nothing happened?" William considered the question carefully. "I think you should be yourselves. Be polite and respectful, as you always are. If Camilla seems upset or distant, that's for her to manage, not for you to fix. You're children. The adults in your life should be making you feel secure and loved, not the other way around." Charlotte looked troubled. "But what if our being there makes her more upset? What if she looks at us and remembers that you stood up for us instead of agreeing with her?" William turned his daughter to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Lottie, listen to me very carefully. You are not responsible for managing adults' emotions. If Camilla is upset about this morning, that's between her, me, and Grandpa. It has nothing to do with you, George, or Louis. You three are innocent in all of this. You didn't do anything wrong, and you have nothing to fix or apologize for." George reached over and took his sister's hand. "We'll stick together this afternoon. The three of us. Like we always do." Charlotte gave her brother a grateful smile, then looked back at their father. "Papa, can I tell you one more thing?" "Always." "I'm really glad you didn't let Camilla change the security. Not because I don't trust her or anything like that, but because it makes me feel like you and Mummy are always thinking about keeping us safe no matter what. It makes me feel protected and loved." William pulled both children close again, overwhelmed by the moment. These were the moments that mattered, he realized. Not the ceremonies or the official duties, but these quiet conversations where he could help his children navigate the complex world they'd been born into, where he could offer them the security of knowing they were loved and protected. Above all else, the afternoon garden party began at 3 o'clock, with the sun casting a golden glow over the carefully manicured lawns of Windsor Castle. Catherine arrived first with Louis, who immediately ran toward the play area that had been set up with his characteristic 5-year-old enthusiasm. She watched him go with a mixture of affection and relief. Louis, at least, is still young enough to be blissfully unaware of the morning's tensions. George and Charlotte arrived with William a few minutes later. Charlotte held her father's hand tightly as they walked through the garden, her eyes scanning the gathering for Camilla. George walked beside them, his posture straight and formal in a way that made him look older than his 11 years. Both children had taken extra care with their appearance, as if donning armor for a battle they hoped wouldn't come. Sergeant Mitchell watched from his position near the terrace, noting the body language of each family member as they arrived. He had been doing this job long enough to read the invisible currents of tension that flowed between people. He saw the way Charlotte's grip tightened on her father's hand when Camilla emerged from the castle. He noticed how George's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, and he observed the careful neutrality of Camilla's expression as she greeted the arriving guests. King Charles was already in the garden, speaking with a small group of family members. He looked relaxed in casual attire, but Mitchell could see the subtle signs of alertness in his posture. The king was watching the interactions carefully, ready to step in if needed. Camilla approached William and Catherine with measured steps. Her smile was polite, but didn't quite reach her eyes. "William, Catherine, how lovely to see you. And George, Charlotte, you both look wonderful this afternoon." "Thank you, Camilla," Charlotte said, her voice clear but quiet. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind during the walk from the castle, reminding herself of her father's words about being herself and letting adults manage their own emotions. George offered a formal nod. "Good afternoon." His voice was steady, but he kept his eyes fixed on a point just past Camilla's shoulder. Much like Sergeant Mitchell had done that morning, Camilla's smile flickered for just a moment. She could sense the distance in the children, the careful formality that spoke of awareness beyond their years. It wasn't hostility exactly, but it was a coolness that stung more than she wanted to admit. "I hope you'll enjoy the afternoon," Camilla said, her tone carrying a slight edge of formality that matched the children's. "There are plenty of activities planned." "I'm sure we will," William interjected smoothly, his hand finding Charlotte's shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. "The children always love spending time in the gardens." An awkward silence settled over the group for a beat too long. Catherine, ever the diplomat, stepped in. "Louis is already making himself at home in the play area. Perhaps George and Charlotte would like to join him?" Charlotte looked up at her father, seeking permission in his eyes. William gave her a small nod and an encouraging smile. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Have fun." The children excused themselves politely and moved away toward where Louis was playing. As soon as they were out of immediate earshot, Charlotte let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That was uncomfortable," she admitted to George. "Very," George agreed. He watched their parents standing with Camilla, the conversation clearly strained despite everyone's attempts at normalcy. "Do you think things will ever feel normal again?" Charlotte considered the question seriously. At 9 years old, she already understood that sometimes broken things didn't get fixed. They just became a new kind of normal. "I don't know. But Papa said, we don't have to fix it. We just have to be ourselves." Near the terrace, the adult conversation was indeed strained. Camilla finally addressed the elephant in the garden. "William, about this morning. I hope you understand I wasn't trying to compromise the children's safety. I simply thought—" "I know what you thought," William said, his tone respectful but firm. "But the security protocols exist for a reason. They're not arbitrary rules that can be bent for convenience. They're carefully designed protections for my children." Camilla's expression tightened. "I am aware of that. I wasn't suggesting we endanger them. I merely thought that for a small family gathering, the size of the gathering doesn't change the threat level." Catherine interjected, her voice gentle but unyielding. "Our children are high-profile targets." That's an unfortunate reality we live with every day. The security team's assessment of necessary protection isn't something we can or will compromise on. Camilla looked between them, seeing the united front, the unmovable boundary they had drawn. I see well. I certainly didn't mean to overstep. I understand, William said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. But in the future, any questions or concerns about George, Charlotte, or Louis should come directly to Catherine or me. That's the appropriate protocol. The message was clear, delivered with the authority of a future king who had learned from the morning's events that some boundaries needed to be explicitly stated. Camilla's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she nodded in acknowledgement. King Charles, who had been observing from a slight distance, chose this moment to join the conversation. "Wonderful afternoon for a garden party," he said with determined cheerfulness. The children seemed to be enjoying themselves already. They all turned to look at where George, Charlotte, and Louis were playing. Louis had convinced his siblings to join him in what appeared to be an elaborate game, involving a football and a great deal of running. Charlotte's earlier tension had melted away as she ran after the ball, her laughter carrying across the garden. George, too, seemed more relaxed, his serious demeanor giving way to the simple joy of play. "They're resilient," Catherine observed, love evident in her voice. "Even when things are complicated, they find their way back to being children." William watched his children with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. Charlotte had been so quiet, so withdrawn over the past few days. Seeing her laugh freely now felt like a small victory. A reminder that despite the complex adult world swirling around them, they could still claim moments of genuine childhood joy. Sergeant Mitchell, still maintaining his watchful position, found himself smiling slightly at the scene. This was what his job was really about, he realized. Not just preventing physical threats, but protecting these moments. Protecting the possibility of laughter and play and normalcy for children, who would carry extraordinary burdens for the rest of their lives. As the afternoon progressed, the initial tension began to ease, at least superficially. Family members arrived and departed. Conversations flowed. And the garden party took on the appearance of normalcy that everyone had hoped for. But those who knew what to look for could still see the undercurrents. Charlotte, in particular, seemed to be watching the adults carefully, even while playing. She noticed how her parents stayed close to each other, presenting a united front. She observed how Camilla kept a certain distance, engaging with other family members but avoiding prolonged interaction with William or Catherine. And she saw how her grandfather, the king, moved between groups like a mediator, trying to ease tensions with his presence. At one point, Charlotte found herself near Sergeant Mitchell's position. She looked up at him with her serious, thoughtful expression. "Thank you, Sergeant Mitchell." For this morning, Mitchell looked down at the young princess, surprised by her directness. "Your Royal Highness, I was simply doing my duty." "I know," Charlotte said, "but it was brave, and it made me feel safe. So thank you." Before Mitchell could respond, Charlotte had already run back to rejoin her brothers. But her words stayed with him. A reminder that his actions that morning had been noticed and appreciated by the very person he had been protecting. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden, the party started to wind down. William gathered his children, noting how Louis had grass stains on his knees and a bright smile on his face. How George looked tired but content, and how Charlotte seemed lighter than she had in days. "Did you have a good time?" he asked them as they prepared to leave. "Yes, Papa," Louis answered immediately, full of 5-year-old enthusiasm. "I scored 3 goals. George nodded. "It was nice. Just being able to play without worrying about anything."
"Oh."
Charlotte looked up at her father with knowing eyes. "It was good, Papa. Everything turned out okay." William understood she wasn't just talking about the party. She was talking about the morning, about the confrontation and its resolution, about the family dynamics that had played out across the day. "Yes," he agreed. "Everything turned out okay. And it always will, as long as we stick together and remember what's most important." As they walked back toward the castle, Catherine fell into step beside William. "They handled today well," she observed quietly. "They did," William agreed. Better than we had any right to expect. Charlotte, especially. Did you see her thank Sergeant Mitchell? Catherine smiled.
I did.
She's remarkable. Our daughter. They both are. All three of them. William glanced back at where King Charles was saying farewell to Camilla. The distance between them seemed greater than just physical space. Today created some cracks, he said quietly. In the family dynamic, I hate that, Catherine replied. But you did what you had to do. What any good father would do? Protected your children. That's never wrong, even when it creates difficulty. Behind them, George and Charlotte walked together, Louis running ahead as usual. Charlotte reached over and took her brother's hand, a gesture that had become their shorthand for solidarity. George, she said softly. Yes. I'm glad Papa stood up for us this morning. And I'm glad Sergeant Mitchell didn't back down. It makes me feel like even when things are complicated, there are people who will do the right thing. George squeezed her hand. Me too, Lottie. Me too, they continued walking. Three young royals who had learned an important lesson that day about integrity, about standing firm on principles, and about the complex interplay of authority and responsibility. They had learned that sometimes love means creating boundaries, sometimes protection requires difficult choices, and that being part of a family doesn't mean everyone always agrees or gets along perfectly. As they entered the castle, the setting sun painted the ancient stones in shades of gold and amber. Inside, the corridors echoed with the sound of children's voices, footsteps and laughter, of life continuing despite complications and tensions. Sergeant Mitchell remained in the garden for a few more minutes, overseeing the final security checks as the event concluded. He thought about the morning's confrontation, about Prince William's support, about Princess Charlotte's unexpected thanks. He had stood his ground when it mattered, had chosen duty over comfort, had protected children who would one day lead a nation. In the distance, through an open window, he could hear Charlotte's voice raised in song. Some silly tune she and George had made up. The sound carried across the twilight garden, a reminder of innocence preserved, of childhood protected, of a simple moment of joy made possible because people had made difficult choices. And in that moment, Sergeant James Mitchell knew with absolute certainty that he had done the right thing. The tensions might linger, the family dynamics might remain complicated, but the children were safe, and they knew they were protected by people who would not compromise on that protection regardless of who asked them to. The royal guard had refused an order from the Queen Consort. The future king had stepped in to support that refusal, and Princess Charlotte had finally spoken, expressing gratitude and understanding beyond her years. Prince George, though frozen in the discomfort of family tension, had found his way back to the simple joy of being a child. In the end, it had all been about love, about protection, about doing what was right, even when it was difficult. And as the stars began to appear above Windsor Castle, the young royals slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were protected, valued, and deeply loved.